Kamen Rider Kuuga, the modern-day revival of the tokusatsu classic Kamen Rider, was an enormous success and laid down some serious groundwork for the series going forward. In the wake of this success, the series found itself in a realm of endless possibility. The future was looking bright, but Toei didn't want to become stagnant and just make Kuuga again. But they also didn't want to push things too far and throw away this second chance for the series. A couple of really interesting choices were made for the follow-up to Kuuga. The next series would be very loosely be based in the same world as Kuuga. Not really, but And the suit design would be somewhat close to the previous series as well. Toei would also recruit Toshiki Inoue, of Jetman fame, to pen the new series. While it may seem funny looking back for anyone familiar with Inoue's later work, this likely would have been looked at as a bold choice back in 2001. Inoue's father wrote an incredible amount of Showa-era Kamen Rider, and now here's his son inheriting that legacy, getting a Kamen Rider show of his own. Inoue would really end up being perfect for the show's new direction. Beginning with Agito, Kamen Rider starts to become a lot more dramatic in a sense. There's a lot less of that police procedural DNA that was found in Kuuga, and more of, well, soap opera type stuff. Taking this vibe and combining it with the action and light horror tendencies of early Kamen Rider really serves to make this next era of the show feel completely unique from pretty much anything I've personally ever seen past tokusatsu. Inoue was the guy that injected some fresh drama and stakes in the Super Sentai when the show desperately needed it in 1991 with Jetman, and now a decade later he was going to bring that same energy to Kamen Rider. What we ended up getting was certainly that.
闇の中見つめてる手を伸ばし掴み取れ君求めるものまた誰かが平気な顔をして夢だと笑っても Ready to go カンセロ仮面ライダーアギト君のままで変わればいい Here we go カンセロ仮面ライダーアギト今君がいないと Get
Agito was a really weird show, honestly. The show was probably most notable for its trinity of main characters, all of them being writers. Before this point, there'd typically only be one writer in each respective Kamen Rider series, with the occasional sidekick or second writer. Black RX and Kuuga brought forth form changes to the writer formula, but Agito was the first writer to bring in 3 Kamen Riders for the narrative. This is something that would be blown wide open in next year's show, but we'll get to that another time. Our main writer is Shoichi Sugami, Kamen Rider Agito. He's a kind-hearted amnesiac that was taken in by this college professor and his makeshift family, and in return, Shoichi kind of acts as a stay-at-home housekeeper and cook. He's really sweet. When trouble calls in the form of the unknowns attacking civilians, Shoichi just sort of blacks out and dashes to intervene in the conflict. Makoto Hikawa, a police officer investigating the unknown threat, is brought into the G3 team and becomes Kamen Rider G3, a man-made Kamen Rider created by the police with assistance from Ozawa, a genius engineer. Hikawa is also kind at heart, but ultimately out of his depth when it comes to the bizarre nature of the threats at hand in this show. Our last writer is Ryo Ashihara, who transforms into Kamen Rider Gills. He's, weird? He was a star swimmer at his university, but ever since a car accident, he's never been quite the same. Over the first several episodes of the show, he starts to experience weird stuff, mostly whenever an unknown attacks, and it eventually manifests itself into Ashihara transforming into Kamen Rider Gills. I want to talk about design for a second here before we go further. Agito is another really great design from Bandai and Toei, but it does kind of look too close to Kuuga for my liking. I get it though. You don't want to alienate people too hard after your big return and ruin everything. I do like how Agito is more intense looking than Kuuga though. Even if the designs are similar, Agito manages to embody a different vibe than Kuuga. Kuuga looks like a friend, an underdog. Agito looks almost fearsome by comparison. Agito's got just a few forms. His base form is ground form, a simple unarmed form that gets the job done. Agito's horns do this really cool flaring out thing right before the rider kick that just kills me every time it happens. It's so cool. Alongside ground form, we've also got storm form, which uses a polearm, and flame form, which uses a sword. There's also Trinity form that combines all three. Late into the show, burning form is introduced, which really ups that fearsome factor. And then finally Shining form, which is like a refined, focused version of Burning. These forms use the Shining Caliber, which is this really rad sword thing that can split into two swords. Oh, cool. Kamen Rider G3 is just beautiful. I love this suit, and it only gets better with G3X. The suit's only upgrade about halfway into the show. Before Kamen Rider came back, that Super Sentai was aired alongside a show called Metal Hero, a show with all kinds of cool robotic suits, and G3 feels very much like a marriage of the design philosophy of that show with Kamen Rider's tried and true stuff. This marriage is something that'll be revisited a ton of times in Heisei Kamen Rider, and I'm just a total sucker for it. I love it. G3 and G3X don't even feature a transformation of any kind. It's literally put on like a suit of armor in the back of the van that transports the damn thing around. For being such a marvel of technology, it's an incredible pain in the ass, and I completely love that about G3's whole deal. Gills is just nasty. I love it though. It's a total tribute to Kamen Rider's horror side that was definitely still in full force at this point. Gills is complete body horror and gross out stuff. Well, as gross out as you could get on children's TV, but still gross. It's nasty. Gills literally grows blades out of his body and uses them to fight. And his upgrade towards the end of the show features tentacles and lots of weird shit like that, and it's kind of tight. Also, look at this. The mouth opens up. That rules. G3 is still my favorite suit from the show. It's a work of art. But Gills is also really wonderful as a design. It still stands to this day as something pretty unique for this era of Rider. The actual show, however, is a bit of a mix between playing it safe after Kuuga and doing really new stuff to push the show forward. That sort of reads to me as some sort of mandate from Toei and Bandai to not fuck it up. It's a bit of a shame, because for the first section of the show I couldn't help but feel Kuuga's immense shadow cloud over this show. Shoichi very much reads as just Godai, but slightly different. Hikawa reads as Ichijo, but he transforms, which, don't get me wrong, both of those are great. But it sort of makes the beginning section of the show kind of weak. It certainly doesn't help that the show does the most half-assed connection back to Kuuga as possible at the beginning. All it is that they remark that G3 was created with Kuuga as a basis, and that's it. That's all. Just one line from the first couple episodes. I searched for more Kuuga stuff in this show, and it's not there. At least not as far as I could tell, just from the show and the movie. Fortunately, by the second half, the characters really start to become more distinct. The show really sets itself apart from Kuuga with its pacing. The show is all centered around Shoichi's journey to recover his memory and his sense of self. This mystery as to his identity bleeds out into many other subplots, the most important example being the Akatsuki incident, a ferry accident that happened a year before the beginning of the series that had a huge effect on the lives of those that were on the ferry. That then bleeds out into the mystery behind Mana's father, the brother of the professor that took in Shoichi and who now takes care of Mana. That's not complicated. And then also ties into the mystery behind Agito, Gills, into the unknown. What is their true nature? Compared to the simpler police procedural that was Kuuga, this may feel both refreshing and convoluted. The actual plotting of the show is a bit messy in my eyes. Like, for instance, they could have held out on Gills for quite a while after his actual debut in the show. Rio really gets nothing to do for a large portion of the show. He's mostly either just standing around being hurt, or yeah, he just kind of stands around and is hurt a lot, and he grows like weird scales on his hands. It's fucking weird. That's about it for him for the entire first half of the show. Is just that. And the thing about Agito is that it's mainly just a giant 51 episode breadcrumb trail. The beginning is pretty well defined despite the weaknesses I stated earlier, and it's obvious that the endpoint of the show was planned out to some degree, but the middle of the show just varies. Agito can both be a fun roller coaster of a show and a frustrating series of meandering episodes circling around revelations that seem just out of reach. In a lot of ways, it's pure, liquid, concentrated television. A series of stops and starts with enough good stuff peppered throughout to keep you going. This is obviously true for many shows, even my favorites in the Kamen Rider series, but I don't think that many shows quite touch how laid bare this aspect is in Agito's plotting. So yeah, the plot is kind of weird and amorphous, and diving deep into any one section or episode is going to require explaining like 12 other things. So let's really just zero in on continuing off a point I made in my Kuuga video. So if anything feels underexplained, just know that I tried my best without trying to get too in the weeds with the plot of this actual show. In that Kuuga video, I said that Kamen Rider is all about telling stories of trauma and how people deal with trauma. This is something that I recognize as a key aspect of the origin of Kamen Rider, and therefore something that the series upholds to this very day. Agito is obviously no exception. Agito actually deals with the theme of trauma in probably one of the more overt ways in the series. You can basically look at each character in the series, primary or secondary, and recognize some type of overarching trauma that they faced and are dealing with. The biggest example of this lies with the survivors of the Akatsuki incident. Throughout the series, this incident is brought up time and time again, as it connects to basically every major plot point in the series. In episode 46, we find out that the Akatsuki was a ferry that had a simple job to carry its dozen or so passengers to their destination, which wasn't really important, not the destination at least. What was important was that the passengers found the body of the Overlord of Light, the counter to the Overlord of Darkness. That escalated incredibly quickly, didn't it? Oh man, I went off script, but I had to laugh. I can't. The Overlord of Darkness being the leader of the unknown. Once the passengers find this body, they are faced with the first unknown. Shoichi, whose real name is actually Tetsuya Sawaki, not actually important because nobody ever refers to him as that ever, transforms into Agito for the first time and fends off the monster. After this, Shoichi ends up washing up on the shore with amnesia, and we're back to where we started. We see the rest of the passengers throughout the series as victims of the unknown, as the monsters are dedicated to hunting them down. The passengers of the Akatsuki, through coming in contact with the Overlord of Light, became endowed with the latent power of Agito. Though Shoichi was the one to transform that night, all of the passengers actually have that power too, it's just not awakened yet. Some of the passengers end up keeping in touch over time, which is really cool, as this is one of the few times that I can think of where Kamen Rider has actually depicted a support group of some kind that isn't just centered around the main writer and his friends. In fact, this may be the only time that I can think of where this has happened in one of these shows. One of the passengers, the one that actually headed up the group effort to keep together as victims of the incident, is Kaoru Kino. Kino is one of the more interesting characters in the show, bearing a dark past and awakening to his powers fairly early, becoming a Kamen Rider, another Agito, in the late parts of the show. Yeah, I know. Creative name, thanks Toei. Or Bandai. Whoever decided that? Plex? I don't know. Kino puts off a really abrasive energy whenever he first shows up, but the more that you learn about him, and especially in episode 46, when you actually see the Akatsuki incident happen, yeah, they hold out on this for 46 episodes, and it's like first mentioned like in the first couple episodes. You learn about how desperate he is, despite the stern demeanor. The fact that he headed up the effort for the victims to network together and be there for each other is really admirable. This Akatsuki incident is really far-reaching. It touches more and more things the farther it stretches out. It's kind of morbidly amusing to just see how many plot points tie back to this one incident that happened on this one day. Hikawa was the cop to save all the passengers of the Akatsuki outside of Shoichi, and Ryo's dad was actually a passenger on the Akatsuki, and so on and so forth. This is honestly kind of outrageous and can feel contrived, but it also kind of just feels true to life, right? I mean, it kind of reminds me of how many things in the 2000s in American culture can be traced back to 9/11 in some way. The fact that a seemingly completely unrelated musical act like My Chemical Romance was actually started because Gerard Way saw 9/11 happen and then felt the urge to help people process their grief, starting a band to help give people a community and an outlet to indulge in. In the same way, the atomic bombings of World War II in Japan kickstarted this entire genre that I'm talking about by its association with inspiring Godzilla, a movie that started a conversation about this kind of tragedy, and that carries on to this very day. This is by far my favorite aspect of the show and the thing that is the most interesting about it to me. The whole show orbiting around this one incident that happened on this one day is just such an interesting, powerful thing. It's a shame that the show takes so long to make all of it click. This whole 50-episode, year-after-year format for Toei's tokusatsu shows is a mixed bag sometimes. Sometimes you get shows that really thrive on this format, and sometimes you get shows that hurt because of it, and I think this is one of them. The plot of the show is just full of so many false starts and red herrings, and though it's thankfully worth it in the end, you definitely struggle with processing the show because so much of it ends up running together. I only watched this show 5 years ago, and then rewatched it for this video. Kuuga was on the same time frame. I watched it 5 years ago, rewatched it right before I did the video, and I remember way more about Kuuga before rewatching it than I did Agito. I was basically almost blank. It was like watching it for the first time all over again. Another weakness of the show was the fact that, the Kamen Rider stuff kind of feels like an afterthought a lot of the time. The fights between our writers and the Unknown are kind of shoved to the very end and very beginnings of episodes a lot of the time. It's actually kind of incredible how often this happens. Agito isn't the only show that does this, but because of the whole plotting issue and how meandering the show can feel sometimes, this flaw really started to get on my nerves. Also, there didn't really seem to be any thought put into how the upgrades for Agito would be written into the show. Agito isn't unique in this regard. Fies! But seriously, G3X is like the only upgrade in this show that gets any kind of build-up. I guess it ties into the whole thing that the Agito transformation that Shoichi and Ryo are going through is something that just doesn't make any sense to them, so things just feel random, but I don't know, it kind of feels weak sauce to me, dog. The breadcrumb trail stops at episode 46, but the show doesn't end until episode 51. This 5-episode ending arc was actually something I completely forgot about, and watching it again for this video, it really struck to me as poignant and really did a great job of bringing the whole thing home. Ryo and Shoichi have to find something to do with themselves now that the big connecting mystery is solved, and the Unknown have seemingly stopped all activity. Ryo starts work at a motorcycle shop, and Shoichi starts work at a restaurant. They find companionship at their respective jobs, and I don't know, it's just really sweet. I appreciate the show giving this much time to showing that sort of settling period after the characters have dealt with and confronted these very things that have clouded their lives for so long. Of course, not everything is chill. After defeating the Overlord of Darkness in episode 46, he's been under some protection by two of the strongest Unknown, who are biding time for some sort of great awakening. The cops are scared of the Agitos now, as well as the Unknowns, so they get rid of Hikawa and put in two knuckleheads to the task of defeating the Agitos. There are a lot of good moments in these last 5 episodes, but the way things wrap up isn't exactly what I'm interested in here. The thing that I think is most remarkable about these 5 episodes is the depiction of people that have already worked past their trauma, using that experience to help others that may also be going through it. The Ryo side of this plotline is kinda and not great. Inoue just really had to write in another female character death, I guess. But the Shuichi side of these episodes is what I really want to close out this video with. Shoichi meets a girl named Kana at the restaurant that he works at. She's not really good at her job, she has a really bad case of the nerves and just keeps dropping plates, messing up recipes, and she's generally a mess. She's yelled at all the time, and Shoichi tries his best to help, but she isn't having it at first. She begins standoffish, but eventually accepts his kindness. Eventually, it also becomes clear that Kana's going through an Agito transformation. Earlier in the show, Shoichi's sister was going through the same thing. Before the Akatsuki incident, she had no idea for the context for what was happening. She felt incredible fear and decided to take her own life. Shoichi, having experienced what he had, and being present for Kana in this moment when he couldn't be for his sister, because he didn't know anything about it, in this moment, he decided to be the vital helping hand that Kana needs. Obviously, there's more to this, and there's more plot that happens after this point. And there's a final battle, and there's cool stuff after this, but to me, this is the true emotional endpoint of the show, I think, is Shoichi helping Kana. People gaining perspective through trauma, through hurt, and being a healing presence in other people's lives. Being there for people that are going through the same thing they used to. That reliance on perspective is ultimately what makes the show for me. Despite my complaints with the show, this point really overpowers everything else. The three perspectives in this show mix together in a way that really satisfies and makes the show a ton of fun to watch. Though I mainly focus on Shoichi here in the ending arc, there's a lot to the show's story that's arresting and exciting to watch. And I didn't even get to talk about my favorite character. Can you fucking believe it? So is Agito a good follow-up to Kuuga? Kind of. The plotting isn't nearly as strong, but it is fun and engaging on its own merits. So it still kind of gets a recommendation from me, though. It's still good. Agito is also able to keep feeling like Kamen Rider, and pushes the series just that little bit further. We get some experimentation here, something that's kind of become the series' trademark over time. The fast, dramatic plotting is something that the showrunners at Toei picked up and ran with for the show, as it was pretty successful during its run. The show also set the stage for more shows to follow and change the format even further, especially in the next year. Agito ran throughout 2001 and into the beginning weeks of 2002, meaning that late into the show's run, the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened in the United States. It's actually been outright stated by people at Toei that Kamen Rider was actually set to end with the ending of Agito. Kuuga and Agito were a nice pair, and Agito fell on the 30th anniversary of the series, so it would have been nice to step away from the series after brief success and try out other stuff. The attacks in America pushed them to look at the show and its significance to the children of Japan. Kamen Rider can be a really helpful series to people, with its depiction of trauma and overcoming grief, as demonstrated in this very show. Toei recognized this and decided to keep the show running to help children that may be catching atrocities like 9/11 on the news. Though, through the power of storytelling and strong direct theming, maybe the showrunners could get through to their audience about how to process these confusing, challenging times. It's always good to have that helping hand, and it's important to be the one to provide it. And I think that's it. This is a video that I kind of had a real bit of trouble trying to write. Agito is a really complex show, just in the fact of like all of its interweaving plot lines and the fact that the three perspectives interweave with each other in such a way that it makes it really difficult to talk about any one thing without having to explain a bunch of other stuff. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to get into. Like, for instance, Hikawa is my favorite character. I didn't even get to talk about him very much. So, there may be something in the cards where maybe I'll try and do a side video later that's like just an ode to Hikawa, who's my favorite character in the show. Yeah, I had a good time making this video, as I always do, and there are some developments coming for Explode When Defeated, and we had on Twitter, you guys voted for the name of the podcast for Godzilla that I'm gonna do, and the name is Discuss All Monsters, uh, presented by Explode When Defeated, and uh, we're gonna work on doing that and putting it together, and we're gonna try and get a big backlog of episodes together before we start releasing, so we can always just be on top of it and always be on time and everything, and so it'll be a consistent thing for you guys. I'm really excited about this show, and especially with that new Criterion box set, our job's gonna get a lot easier for it too. So, but yeah, other than that, I don't really have much in the way of updates and stuff. It's just, I guess I'll see you next month. I think next month I'm going to do a Super Sentai show, so stay tuned. And thank you so much. Follow Twitter, check out Patreon, subscribe if you liked it, like the video if you decide to do that. Do whatever. Have a great day, month, year, whatever. Have a great life. Even though I'll be seeing you next month. Jesus. Bye.